Thanks for having me here today. My name is Ash, and I'm going to do the annoying speaker thing real quick. I'm going to ask a question, and you're going to raise your hand. Who here is a developer or a learning developer or someone who codes in any way? Okay, cool. So the reason I ask is that I'm going to show you a lot of code on the screen today. It's going to be way too small. That's the point. I don't want you like trying to read it line per line. I'm going to highlight specific things in the code that I'm going to call out. And then, of course, there's a repo if you want to go check it out. I'll have a QR code later, so don't feel like you've got to try to absorb a whole class inside of JavaScript while I'm talking. All right, so I recently got this report from a company called Slashdata. They go out and they learn about all kinds of developers and what they're doing. And I thought this data is really great in terms of framing. When we say AI for the mere mortal developer, when I say that in this talk, who am I talking about, right? There's all these different things that I could be addressing. Specifically, we're not talking about dev tools in this talk, nor are we talking about building your own large language model based on proprietary data in your enterprise. Instead, we're looking at adding AI functionality to applications. And specifically, we're doing it through third-party APIs or services or through open source models. Okay, so like, that's what we're going to be focused on here. If you want to talk dev tools or anything like that, I'll do that all day. I love it. But for this, I just really want to focus on, cool, so AI, how do I bake that into my application? That's what we're going to be focused on here. And about a year and a half ago, I wrote a blog post. By the way, I guess I should tell you, I lead a developer relations team for a Series C startup called Nylas. We specialize in providing a single abstraction layer across all of the email and calendar providers out there. So if you want to integrate with email or calendar in your app, we're a one-stop shop as opposed to integrating with Google and various flavors of Microsoft and Yahoo and yada yada, all down the line. So leading this DevRel team, we had sort of like this mandate from the CEO who said, let's all in the company, everyone needs to start using AI at least twice in their day-to-day. And that was the mandate. And so I started thinking, like, inside of DevRel, what would that mean for us? And I wrote a blog post about that, which I think has aged relatively well. It's worth diving into. We won't dig into that blog post specifically, but where I landed at the end of that post, kind of writing about that, is that for our team, we really wanted to focus on that mere mortal developer, right? We know, because we serve developers who are working with Nylas APIs, that we want them to be able to take Nylas APIs and also OpenAI or whatever else and build features. So if we haven't done that, how can we help developers do that? And so we started focusing on the mere mortal developers. Someone at some company somewhere wants to build something where they're mashing up our APIs and an LLM, a large language model. And we thought, okay, first, what's the mere mortal developer? Why mere mortal? Well, you know, like, I think AI, maybe less so today, but I'm not sure. Certainly a year and a half ago, felt kind of scary if you're a developer, because set aside the ideas that, like, maybe it'll take your job, maybe it won't. Everyone can have an opinion about that. But it kind of felt like, wait, I build web applications, what do I know about AI? And there was a little bit of intimidation. This was new for a lot of us. So I wanted to focus on mere mortal developers from the perspective of, you code, but you're not an LLM expert, like myself. You want to sprinkle some AI magic into your application, like me. And you want to learn by doing it. What I didn't want to do is read a bunch of white papers up front, right? Or go take a graduate course on machine learning. Those are all valid options, and those are things you can do. But it felt like that market was pretty well served anyways. What about the people who just want to show up, like, try some tutorials and, like, build something cool, and then see how that extrapolates into their day-to-day job? So given that we do email and calendar APIs at Nylas, our team came up with the obvious ideas. By now, these are super obvious. At the beginning, we felt a little smart that we came up with them. But things like something that'll triage your email, right? Apple's just about to release something in Apple Mail that does that, right? It'll take all your emails and use AI to triage, or label or categorize, however you want to phrase that. Email autoresponder. We've all heard that idea 1,000 times now. Calendar chat, talk to your calendar. Or time finder, something where you kind of take something like maybe a Calendly, but then, like, sprinkle some AI into it, and just now I don't have to think about it as much. These were fairly like table stakes ideas, and that's, as a DevRel team, that's where you want to start, because everyone can relate to these ideas, and then from that we can show them, oh, here's how you do it. So we had to start somewhere, and the idea that we started with was this. This is just a screenshot of a little demo app. As a DevRel team, frequently you find that you're gonna build demo applications and then open source them on GitHub so that people can come up and just be like, I don't know, show me the code. How does this work? What can I build? Well, one thing you could build is this. And this is just my inbox, but taken and run through an LLM and then summarized into a different into a different UI. We'll look at actually how to make this. This is what we're gonna focus on here. Okay, so the way this is all set up, and again, like the focus here is to show you under the hood, if you're going to build AI features into your application, how do you even get started with that? This is one way to think about it. So we're gonna walk through this architecture, and again, you don't have to internalize all of this because you'll be seeing this over and over again. You just saw the client side, and then you can see that when we load it, there's a GET request that's gonna hit the app server. So the first thing we're gonna do is this email service.js, arbitrarily named file, but on my server, if you go to, in this case, it's going to be localhost, and you'll see it running in a minute, but when we go there, it automatically runs this email service. So we're going to have a look at that first. What's it doing? Again, lots of code. Don't try to internalize this. The code will be available anyways, but I will call out some things here. First of all, this email service, what it's doing is you can see this const messages, and then you're going to await Nylas.messages.list. If I've already OAuthed in as the user, then this Nylas, then I have this thing called a grant ID, which represents me. And so if I do Nylas.messages.list, it's that simple. Regardless of whether I use Gmail to log in or Microsoft or whatever else, it's just gonna go to that service and fetch all of my emails for me. So this isn't really a pitch of Nylas at all. This is probably the last time we're really even gonna look at that part of the code. But all we're doing is grabbing inside of this messages constant, we're grabbing a list, an array of emails. Okay, so this is a key thing, right? And you can see, again, a lot of code. We're gonna focus on only one line in this whole thing. All we're doing at this point, though, is data massaging, right? We got back a whole list of emails. So you can imagine that's a JavaScript object that has something like a to and a from and a body and a sent time and all of that kind of stuff. We need to turn that into something that the LLM can use. So I called out this one line where I've pulled in an NPM module called strip HTML. And here's the thing. It's just a one-liner. Who cares? Well, if you're building AI features, this is actually a very basic example of something that you're going to care about a lot. You are the carer in this situation. Let me show you why. Compare if you think about it under the hood, a lot of your emails that you get in Gmail or anything else, they are an archaic form of HTML full of table data like you've never seen. It's crazy. And so I could just take like a basic thing. I think I really just pulled this data today from one of my emails. It was from Crucial. They're trying to sell me SSDs. And for a sale on SSDs from Crucial today, we went from just doing the stripping, the HTML alone, we went from 930 lines to 56. Okay, whatever. But as a human, at least we can kind of already see the magnitude of savings we're going to get. Savings on size, 39 kilobytes down to 2 kilobytes. And here's where it starts to really translate into why it matters. Tokens. On OpenAI, you can go to on their platform page. They have something that will calculate how many tokens you're going to end up using. Those tokens is money. And it'll look like not much money for one single API call. But when you start adding that up for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of documents, which hopefully your application's at that level of scale, that's going to matter a lot. So look at the difference here. Each one of these tokens is costing me a fraction of a cent. I'd rather pay for 380 than 13,000 myself. And I think your CFO would agree with that at the company you're going to work at. Okay, so that's pretty much it, right? This is a basic example. So all we did was we grabbed all my emails and then we massaged the data. And specifically, we massaged the data in a way that makes it easier to just for the human to read. We skipped over some of that. But then, most importantly, we got to make it cheaper, faster, and easier for the LLM to read. By the way, if we send all that HTML to the LLM, even if you just have all the money in the world to burn, all you're doing is confusing the LLM with a bunch of HTML that doesn't matter for the use case. So that's another good way to think about it, is not only is it monetary savings, but you're getting better results as a side effect. Okay, so LLM service. Again, this is just architectural decisions that are arbitrary. Don't worry about my code here. The point here is I'm going to walk you through some specific lines that matter. I've made a class that's an LLM service because I want to show you how we can swap out different LLMs. So we're just going to have this class that represents an LLM service in general that has a generate prompt function, and there's really nothing else to think about there. Okay, so inside of any app that's talking to an LLM, at the end of the day, there's still a prompt in there somewhere. And I like to ask people this when they're, as service vendors who are coming to me, showing me a new AI-based thing for our team, here, buy this service, please, kind of thing. I always want to know, like, how much of this entire application is just a prompt? Some of the applications out there are super just a prompt. And okay, that's fine. I mean, but there are some things where if you are a developer and you can see, okay, this is how I would do that anyways, you have to ask yourself, you know, does it make sense for me to go with a third party, or can I just prompt the LLM myself? Anyways, a bit of a side note, but I like to just own it right here and say, like, this is my prompt. This here is where I am begging and pleading with an LLM to do the thing I want, and sometimes it listens. This is the fun part. If you're a programmer, part of your programming now is about just asking and hoping and praying in plain English to a thing called an LLM that you send it plain English, and then it recognizes that, looks through the data, and then does the thing you hoped it would do. It's weird. It's really weird. So anyways, this is a whole long-winded way of saying, like, I wrote all of this context, and that goes along with every email I send in. Basically, it's just like, please, 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 summarize this. Okay. So now we're just going to pass it back and forth to the LLM. So let's do it. Let's make some LLM calls over API. So this is the OpenAI service. You knew it was coming. Of course, we're going to show an example of OpenAI. Again, ignore the class, but you can see here that all we're doing is extending that LLM service, and then we're doing that summarize. We're adding a summarize method on that. Inside of that, we pass in the email. You can see that, right? That prepared email. This isn't the full HTML. It's that stripped of all of the HTML and prepared in terms of, like, readable format for dates and people's names and all of that. And then we're calling that LLM. So you can see over here the response is this.LLM. In this case, that's OpenAI. And then we do .chat.completions.create, and that's where you get into OpenAI's particular API footprint. All this stuff is just like, you just have to learn it when you're using their SDKs, right? In this case, we're using a model which is GPT 3.5 Turbo, and then we pass in the messages, right? We're passing in that prompt. And that's really all we're doing there. So we'll look at some other options, but I thought, hey, I've been showing you a lot of static slides, so let's put some risk into this talk here. Let's see if we can actually make this work in front of people. All right. Let's try and see. This is the part where I get to hold my breath and hope. It looks like it's hung, though. Oh, no. I might not be connected to Wi-Fi. Or actually, something tells me that connecting to this TV might have usurped my connection, but let's see. Looks like I'm connected. Let me try this. Oh, that's loading. All right. Literally was working just a few moments ago. Let me see. All right. Well, we may not mess with it. There are other demos to show you in a second, but oh, it's too bad. So anyways, what I was hoping to show you here is, like, just something running on localhost. We'll give it a second and see if it works. But anyways, it would do the exact same thing that I was showing you in the screenshot just a minute ago. So, but sometimes these things hang, and a sample code can definitely choke on you when you least want it to. I'll see if I can revive it later. But seeing it working is probably less important at this point anyways than just showing you, like, the difference between, like, Inside of that application, I have a little drop down that shows you, okay, here's when we're calling OpenAI, here's when we're calling Hugging Face, here's when we're calling Ollama. And these are the things that, as a developer, actually matter to you. So again, you don't need to take all of this in. The point is that every one of these LLMs have a different API footprint. And it's gonna look different. Each one of these pieces of code are doing the exact same thing, but they're doing it for a different service. Okay, so, and we've only talked about OpenAI. You know what that is, but then I just mentioned something called Hugging Face and Ollama. I want us to look at those. So, OpenAI, if you go to platform.openai.com, that's where you're gonna get all the developer goodness. Someone mentioned their developer portal earlier. I too think it's a really excellent example of documentation and samples and all of that. Great stuff. This is where you can go to get things like GPT-4 and Whisper and 4.0, 3.5, whatever. There's tons on there. Generally speaking, when you're working with them, you're talking to the cloud. On Hugging Face, this is sort of like the GitHub of LLMs and AI models. So you can go to huggingface.co. It's community-centric, lots of people contributing cool stuff on there. You can call their APIs in the cloud, but you can also download models, depending on what the person who created it is trying to offer you. So this gives you a lot of optionality. It's like walking into a record store and trying to find the one record you're looking for, and it's like this dusty old record store. Just pull things out, try to search, ask the people that work there, whatever. It's really cool, but it does take some time. Then there's this thing called Ollama. Anybody played with Ollama before? Ah, this is great. All right, I can't wait to show you Ollama then. Ollama is, you go to ollama.com. At its base, it's a CLI where you can talk to LLMs locally on your computer, all local. So you can turn off your Wi-Fi and you're still running Llama 3.2 or whatever else it might be, and there's a bunch of stuff in there. It comes, here's even more fun, it comes with a REST API. So you're not stuck just talking to a CLI because probably you don't want to do that, but there's a REST API under the hood, so it's running a local server. Your app can talk to that thing. That's really, really neat. Okay. I do want to at least show you that much. So here it is in my terminal. We're going to do this. I'm typing with one hand. Okay, Ollama list. So if I do that in the CLI, you can see here that I have all of these models installed and running locally. So Llama 3.2, Tiny Llama, CodeStraw, Llama 2, and so on. There's a lot more than this. Mind you, I'm running on a MacBook Air M2. These things still work. They actually work. So let's do it. Let's try. We're going to do Ollama run. And then we'll do Llama 3.2. Startup time's usually a thing, but that wasn't actually that bad. So here we go. Let's say, for example, tell me about Flatiron School. And there you go. Again, this is a MacBook Air M2, so imagine I have a Mac Studio at home with a M2 Ultra in it, which is insane. It's really fast there. Apple's about to release Macs with M4s. If this is working like this today on an M2, this is where things will go, right? And so there's a lot of really smart options here, especially if you're a developer with customers who have questions about where are you sending my data? You might be able to do something like this depending on what your application's doing. Cool. Okay, so I just showed you that, and there's a demo app. Didn't work right then and there. I can show it to you later. Anyways, it's just a UI that does some API calls under the hood and shows you summaries. So what does this actually work like in prod, though, when you're actually trying to build out an app? Well, we decided to build a thing just for funsies called Vibebox. So you can go to vibebox.app, OAuth your Gmail, and what this thing does is it takes in your emails and it translates them into happy vibes. So that way, instead of going to your inbox and someone's just like, hey, where's that report? Instead, it's just full of emojis and be like, hello, sunshine. Just sending you a message from the magical land of rainbows that we're wondering about that beautiful report that we know you're going to do great at. And Again, this is just for fun. It's not meant to be a serious app, but we do have a product manager at our company who has decided this is now his favorite way of looking at his inbox, which sort of makes me feel sad, but also happy. We did something good here. So that's just a fun little example, but okay, great, whatever, right? How about a serious app? Well, this is where I've got some folks that I know that are starting up a company called Scored, SC0RED.com. And what they do actually is they use AI to create reviews of companies for people that are working in professional services or in mergers and acquisitions, so M&A space. And people want to come in and be able to learn about some of these companies that are otherwise quite difficult to get like a global view on. So this is just an example of a summary, right? But a lot of this, actually most of this is generated by AI. Cool thing here, and this is a point I'll drive home in just a second. When you ask for their stuff, like when they say, okay, I want an assessment on, I think, what was that, LabCorp was the example there? In real time, it runs all of these things, and it shows you this in the loader. I actually asked them when I was looking at, they showed this to me. Each one of these things is completing at different times when it's actually running. And I said, all right, is this just like one of those bullshit kind of like loader pages where it's like, yeah, 20% done, 88% done, whatevs, and now you're gonna wait a long time? No, these are all running, and they're all running against LLMs in different ways. So you can see when you take it to the extreme, some of the cool stuff you can do. So you can remember earlier we talked about you don't just take an email and then toss it to an LLM and then give it back to your user. Obviously that's a thing you can do, but no one's gonna want that. You're gonna get suboptimal results. Taken to its extreme, you can do things like this where you're like, well, now I'm gonna pull all these different data from different services and massage it in different ways and use different LLMs that are, are running different prompts or optimized for different use cases to get the best results. So I got one of the co-founders had sent me this message about it, which I think is just worth reading, because again, like this is super coming from the business perspective, but I think it's helpful for us developers to understand this. Building AI capabilities isn't simply about generating responses, it's about crafting intelligent systems. At Scored, we've created robust data pipelines and advanced data messaging techniques to extract actionable insights for our customers. This approach is what transforms raw data into the sophisticated, scalable solutions that drive business impact. So again, in our email example, all we did for this highfalutin statement was just strip the HTML. But in a real world use case, there's gonna be any other number of things you might need to do to prep the data, and you might be talking to the same LLM a couple of times under the hood, or different LLMs, right? I've heard of use cases, for example, where the first LLM might, if you ask it, say, for a markdown file, it may give you a markdown file that's not formatted properly. So now you need another LLM that you're paying less for to just go in and validate that markdown and make the changes. Pretty basic use case, but it matters a lot, especially if you're doing something like developer docs. So it's just another example of like, it's not as straightforward as you might think if you're used to doing things with chatbots. Okay, so here we are, right towards the end. We're gonna do takeaways. Here's some checklisty things that you can think about when you get started. So first up, just defining your task, because if you kind of like, well, I kind of have a thing I want to do, and I'm just going to start cobbling together stuff, but you haven't really done this before, like you really need to define your task. So if you're used to talking to these chatbots, have you noticed how you have to like get good at asking it questions? Like, I don't even say this is like prompt engineering for me personally. It's just more about like learning how to provide context, which has actually helped me learn a little bit more about how to communicate with other humans as well, right? But this is that kind of thing, like stop and ask yourself, like, and write it down, like, what am I trying to do? That won't be wasted effort because one, you're gonna be clearer, and two, you probably will use that text almost verbatim in part of your application at some point. Next up, choose your service. Today we looked at OpenAI, we looked at a little bit of Hugging Face, or it acknowledged its existence. We looked at Olama, if you can run a local use case, but there's lots of stuff out there that you could be working with, so you wanna choose your service. Then under that, you gotta choose your model, right? Even if you're just going with OpenAI, that doesn't necessarily default you into wanting to use GPT 4.0 that might be good for a certain use case, but if you can drop down to something that's faster and cheaper, you're going to want to do that if you're working at scale. So you kind of have to think through which models are going to suit my purpose inside of the service. Excuse me. Next up, prep your data. This is the one I've been trying to hammer home just because I think it's like really easy to not think about it when you're tying things up at first, but you're super going to run into that fast. And you want to pass in just the right amount of data, the right amount of context without giving it a bunch of extra stuff. And then consider on the other side, like, okay, that first response from the LLM, is that something I can just hand off to the user, or is there more work to be done here? Then you'll devise your prompt. I don't have a lot of suggestions around the art of, what's it called, prompt engineering. I think it's just something you play with until you figure it out. But if someone knows more about that than me, I'm happy to take it on. Either way, like, you'll find that you end up playing in the space more than you think. You will be begging the LLM to do the thing. My favorite thing is if you ask it to respond with one word, you ask it a question and say, hey, from now on, can you just respond with one word, please? It'll be like, yeah, or sure, I can. Which, sure, I can is not one word. So, like, you have to get used to that kind of thing, and, like, it makes it really, really hard to test. Like, your application code can't just immediately choke on the first unexpected response you get. Hard stuff, but fun. And then handle the output. Okay, so LLM checklist, things that I'm not really here to talk to you about, but are things that you're probably going to want to think about, are things like RAG versus fine-tuning, RAG, retrieval augmented generation. This is where you just take like a body of documents, chunk it into some sort of database. Usually it's going to be a vector database. When you ask the question, first thing that happens is that your query goes into that database. They find similar things that might help. That adds to your original query. Then it's passed off to the LLM. I have a video somewhere that you can check out. I go through a library called embed.js that I think is an interesting way to dip your toe into RAG if you're curious. Agents, big question mark. I have nothing to say on that right now. Vector DB or no? Some people say you need a vector database if you're doing RAG. Some people say no. Not here to answer that one either. Standard SDKs and libraries. Someone mentioned things like LangChain and their Langstorm, or who knows what. There's like a lot of little things like that out there that could make it easier for you to swap out LLMs if that's what you're trying to do. So anyways, it's something to consider, but like that's another thing you'll have to think about up front. Storing evolving user preferences is an interesting one for me. Think about if you were, for example, building an auto triager for your email. Well, your user is going to have opinions on whether or not you're triaging correctly or not, but those may change over time. How do you expose that to the user? Like ChatGPT does, for example, like it stores like a memory, so it tries to remember a little bit about you, and then base its responses on that, and then the user can go in and delete parts of the memory if you want to do that. That's the thing you can do today, just as an end user. That's a solution, but there's probably a lot of other solutions that we could think about. Real UX question there. And then lastly, probably not lastly, but lastly on this list is managing cost. Again, we talked about some ways to handle that in terms of just like making sure that you're only sending over the data that you need to use. That improves responses, but it also takes down the cost considerably. Cool, so I mentioned that there would be places to go to. So I got a few links here. This is the first of, I think, 2 link slides. First up is if you want to play around with Hugging Face, I have a really simple demo here on that. Just grab that QR code. It's on, these are GitHub paths, so you can go to github.com/Nylas-sample/start-HF. And same thing for the embed.js. I have a repo on there as well as some videos. So the only other thing is I have just recently started live streaming this kind of stuff. So I would really super appreciate it if you help me out. Like, I was super new. Go to @MirrorModelDev on Twitch or YouTube and follow me up. You won't see much on there right now, but when I'm in, like, for the last month or so, except for this last week, I've been on there almost daily on Twitch. We've done things like I'm currently teaching my daughter one of the Japanese alphabets, and side thing, but I just want to mention this real quick. I asked Claude one day while we were having coffee about like, what's a good way to do this? And it literally just like on the fly built like a little HTML app. I handed it to her, and I couldn't get my phone back. She's like 7, she's like super hooked on it. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Claude's a really fun dev tool for that kind of UI-based thing to get you started. If you're someone like me who prefers hiding in the back end, it's a great way just to like, it makes something on the fly, and then from there you can do things like deploy it. But anyways, on this channel we do stuff like that. We go from basic idea to working with an LLM to fleshing it out to actually deploying it. I'm super in love with a service called Valtown that's based here in Brooklyn, but they're like serverless functions that you can deploy apps. Super fun thing to play with. So anyways, follow me on there if you're interested in this kind of thing. I'd really appreciate it. And I think that's it. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or anywhere else. Thank you for your time, and I super look forward to seeing what you build with AI.
Are you doing Q&A? Questions? Any questions? Yeah. We have a few questions. If there's any questions, don't forget that this is the last talk between you and food, so keep them conversations brief, but thank you.
Yes or no questions only, please.
Yeah, don't be shy. Ask those questions. He had a great presentation. All right.
Yep. Yeah, so the question was about how to take data that customers consider to be private or they don't want exposed to like a public API, like an OpenAI, for example, but actually deploy that as like a privacy-first AI solution. That's something that I only have like the threads of thoughts on right now about how that'll work. I think there are some cloud providers that'll give you an instance, for example. It's like the thing like running on my own Mac, like obviously that doesn't scale. If you're shipping like native applications, you'll probably be able to get away with that even on some mobile devices. But when it comes to cloud services, like you're probably going to need to look into something where they let you like pull in an instance that is essentially like air gapped in some, air gapped's probably the wrong word, but gapped in some way. I wish I had more details for you on that one, but that's something that I need to dig into myself. Yeah. By the way, the audio side of things has been super interesting for me recently. Locally, I was able to pull down Whisper and write a Node script that would, so like all the videos I'm doing, it's really silly, some of the things like, you know, as a developer you get lazy about, and I'm like, man, like I really don't want to summarize this video. So what I can do now is just write a little script that will use FFmpeg to take a video, convert it into audio, run that through Whisper, and then run the, you know, so you can imagine, right? A lot of services are gonna do this for you, but like, to be honest, again, that kind of stuff, that's like something you can definitely do on your own if you want to. You've done it. Yeah, keyword spotting and Rhino. I want to talk to you about this later then. That's really cool. Yeah, exciting use case. Thank you. Anything else? Yes?
Is there any concern in terms of extracting the data and like data that could be lost? So how can we go about that, and how do we go in terms of making sure there's a minimum of like certainty that there is actual good data that's important, that's not being like lost when extracting that data?
So any concerns about lost data? I think I'd have to ask some follow-up questions about that, but like at least in my use case here, there's really, it's up to me as the developer to store the stuff, right? So for example, in that email summarizer application, if I want to maintain an original copy of that email so it's not just sort of lost or whatever, I don't have to pull it from the API again, well, that really just comes down to me storing it myself. You know, so like I might store copies, and then I think actually what I'm doing in that application anyways is just like each summary that I'm exposing in the UI, there is actually an object that shows the original message as well in a production application, I would probably be storing all of that stuff. But I think the data hygiene stuff is sort of just comes back to our roots as developers and like what do we think we're going to need to take care of. But yeah, you certainly don't want to like leave that up to. I hope the LLM gives me the full response back and all this kind of, because it won't. It'll, even if it tells you it will, it might mess it up. You don't want to trust it. Any other questions? Thank you.